AMC's Better Call Saul just wrapped up its fourth season. I'm Zach Laws of Gold Derby, and with me now is Judy Rhee. She's the production designer on the show. And Judy, you actually are a new addition to the Better Call Saul Breaking Bad universe because you just joined as the production designer in this fourth season. Talk about, I guess, jumping right onto this show that's already been on and well established. What was that experience like for you?
It was actually great. I was a huge fan of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, so I was thrilled when I got the phone call. And yeah, of course, it's a little intimidating to come on to a show that has such a huge following and has already been established in some degree in terms of the look and its direction. But I found it as a challenge to bring something new and my own interpretation, and while keeping the visual continuity of the show and the whole series going all the way to Breaking Bad. But it is a prequel, so you have a little bit of leeway, in keeping with the continuity of time. But it was challenging for sure. Yeah.
Well, how did you get involved in it? I mean, had you worked on anything that Vince Gilligan had done before, or how did you kind of get to be the one to take over the duties?
I was contacted by Melissa Bernstein, one of the producers. She had seen my work on Alpha House, and she felt that it would be a good match. So yeah, she reached out, and I met with Vince and Melissa and Peter Gould, and we hit it off. And yeah, we got along really quite well, and it was a fantastic show.
So the show has been on for 4 years now. You've got 3 years worth of groundwork that's already been laid. Plus, you've got this other show that had been on previously that had its own look. What were some challenges that were presented to you, like new challenges that you faced with the fourth season?
Well, with the fourth season, there are certain things that had already been shot, and the timeline jumps back and forth. There are some flashbacks, and because it's a prequel, but also kind of has a nod to what's already been established to Breaking Bad, which is integrated in the writing. I think the challenge for me was to keep track of what had already been said and shown and make sure that you didn't disrupt that timeline. So there was a lot of going back and rewatching certain episodes from Breaking Bad as well as Better Call Saul to make sure that that timeline wasn't broken, or you didn't, interrupt that that visual thread that had to be kept.
In terms of color and texture and things like that, how would you describe aesthetically the world of Better Call Saul?
The world of Better Call Saul is, Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where it takes place. It's really one of the characters of the show. So you keep that in mind as you're designing, with the certain color palette that exists in that world. And, like I said, a lot of that has already been established in Breaking Bad. So even though it is a prequel, you do have to kind of, like I said, keep the continuity. There is a certain palette of that region of Southwest, and specifically New Mexico and Albuquerque. So keeping that in mind, it is a certain kind of earth tone. There's a lot of variations of pinks and browns, and there are some odd colors that you don't necessarily see in other parts of the country. So you try to keep that in mind. And there were certain codes of color that had been established in terms of what it meant. Like red it had a significance that was determined in Breaking Bad, and that was kept throughout as well.
It's honestly, I mean, it's very vibrant in a way. I mean, considering the subject matter of it, it's pretty grim. It's a very, I think part of this probably has to do with the setting itself, but it feels very colorful and vibrant.
It is colorful and vibrant, and part of that is the palette that exists, like I said, in that region. There is bright pops of color, even within the landscape that's mostly brown and earth tones. But also, the show has a bit of a sense of humor. So that was, you could interpret the humor with the shades of color chosen, to give it a little bit of a pop that might be slightly exaggerated, and to underscore what it is that may be coming up or what it is that you're referencing from past episodes. So that was a lot of fun to play with as well.
You mentioned, obviously, this is a prequel to Breaking Bad, and so it's working towards connecting the two shows. I don't want to necessarily get into spoiler territory because I know there's probably some people who still haven't watched it yet. But can you just talk about some of the ways that that was integrated into this season, or how you worked to integrate it into this season?
Well, this season is a turning point in some ways for the series. The relationship between uh, Jimmy McGill, or Saul Goodman, who Jimmy McGill eventually becomes, you see that progression further along. And they have some challenges in their personal relationships, in the relationship between Kim Wexler and himself. So that gets highlighted in the design as well. And she's there's some new sets that will come up. People have seen, most people have seen the season, but for the people who haven't, there are some surprises. There's some turning points. We're further along in terms of the progression of Saul Goodman. And it starts to take a slightly darker tone. Up until now, it's played pretty straightforward in terms of his job and career. But I think he does more exploration of his own inner Saul Goodman.
Was it? I'm just gonna. All right, spoiler alert. People skip ahead if you haven't seen it yet. Can you talk about some of those things that you needed to, as a designer, kind of recreate and things like that?
Yes. So there's something that gets established and shot as one of the major sets in Breaking Bad, and we see the beginning of that and how it becomes what it is in Breaking Bad. So we're sort of working backwards in terms of the design. So you start with what's been seen, you work backwards in terms of how the construction may have happened, how the research and the groundwork and the excavation, so to speak, lays the foundation for this particular set. So I don't know how much to talk about. People who have seen the season will know exactly what I'm talking about. So that was interesting to sort of design backwards. How did they start knowing what the end product had to be? Right. So that was interesting, yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask about your Emmy submission tape. You are submitting Something Stupid, which is the 7th episode of the season. Can you talk about why you chose that episode? What about it do you think specifically highlighted your work?
That particular episode, I felt, showed the most new sets that we shot for the season. We get to see Kim's new work environment, which was shot at a different location. We built it as a set. So it was an interpretation of what was already shot without interrupting any sort of continuity, but slightly, has a different variation. We expanded it and showed more space within the work area. It also shows the beginning of the Super Lab, which spoiler alert, I just said it. That I think will be really interesting for a lot of people to see from its very beginning stages to, especially if they're fans of Breaking Bad, to see what it does become. So for me, it was about showing the most from the season of new sets and expanding on what has already been established.
You've worked on a wide variety of projects throughout your career. You've done a lot of movies, you've done television, you've done some period films before. The Hours was something you worked on, but you've done a lot of contemporary stories.
Mm-hmm.
You say, I think it's easy to overlook the challenges of being a production designer on a contemporary film or television show, but what would you say are some of the unique challenges of doing a contemporary story as a designer?
I think the challenges are always to bring something new and fresh and your own interpretation, but also a reinterpretation of what people have seen before. So you want to give it a look, an edge that maybe they hadn't thought about in a particular subject matter or a city or a story or a genre. So it's always about trying to bring some new version of it that may be slightly unexpected, without interrupting the story, because really ultimately you're there to help tell the story. So I think in many ways, it's much more challenging to do present contemporary and keep it fresh and new and different than it is to do a period piece, because that's kind of historically tied or authentically tied to a certain, authenticity that I don't think you have too much leeway on, unless of course it's a specific genre where you can't completely reinterpret the past. But yeah.
Right. I guess maybe perhaps fantasy and science fiction or give you a little bit more of a a little bit more imagination to work with. I wanted to ask you, you are working on the upcoming Breaking Bad movie. Um, can you talk a bit about? I know I can't ask you to spoil anything on that, but just how's that going? Can you tell us anything about what you're up to?
It's going really well. Once again, I was thrilled to be asked to work on it. Vince Gilligan is a lovely human being and a fantastic collaborator as, writer, director. What can I tell you about it without telling you too much? I think fans will be amazed and hopefully fulfilled with the story that we're going to tell. And being a fan of Breaking Bad, I love the story. It's actually the story that I wanted to see. So yeah, I think hopefully it'll be well received, and people will be very excited about the story.
It's interesting to see how this show has spawned, first a prequel series with Better Call Saul, and then a film that's going to center more on Aaron Paul's character, Jesse. It's interesting to see how this one show can kind of spin out into all these other different kind of stories. I mean, why do you think it's so malleable and adaptable?
Well, I think specifically because of the writing. All the characters in it are so well developed, and of course you're curious about where they all individually came from, where they are now, and where they're going to go. I mean, that's kind of limitless in terms of storytelling. So I know for me, beyond, Walter Wright and, Jesse Pinkman's story, of course, there's plenty of other characters that we could continue to explore. So it is kind of limitless.
Yeah, it is. Before I let you go, you competed at the Art Directors Guild for this show for your first season of working on it. You've also been nominated there before for the Hours. What does that recognition mean for you? And specifically, I mean, to get it for this show that you came in on late, what does it mean for you to be recognized by your peers for your work on it?
Oh, it was tremendous. It was such an honor for both nominations. The one for the Hours, I was one of 2 or 3 different art directors. So I did the American portion of that movie. There were 2 other art directors out of London. So that was a great honor, of course, and that was a fantastic project to work on. Being nominated again for Better Call Saul was, in many ways a greater honor because it was, like you said, it was a 4th season and it was completely unexpected. And it was a very gratifying show to work on creatively and in many different ways. So I felt like it was, it was great honor to really be nominated by, especially your peers, because there's such great work and there's so many shows out there that have an unbelievable amount of creativity. And so to be nominated amongst the 3 or 4 was quite an honor.
I have one more question to ask you before you leave. Are you working on season 5 of this show?
Unfortunately, I was not able to. My timeline didn't work out with the schedule, specifically with the Breaking Bad movie and when that was going to end and when season 5 was going to start up. And so unfortunately not.
I guess
I'll go back for 6, though.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I guess I'll have to ask somebody else about what's going on season 5. Judy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your work. And thanks to all of you at home for watching. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button below. Make sure you visit us